Mark Tribe is an artist who works across media and forms, including drawing, photography, installation, video, and performance. His recent work explores the relationship between landscape and technology. He has had solo exhibitions at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., Momenta Art in New York, Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, the Queen Victoria Museum in Launceston, Australia, and Diverse Works in Houston. His work has also been shown at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, the Malin Collection in Houston, Centre Pompidou in Paris, the National Center for Contemporary Art in Moscow, MUAC in Mexico City, Site Santa Fe, the San Diego Museum of Art, Museo de Antioquia in Medellin, Blanton Museum of Art in Austin, Telfair Museum of Art in Savannah, Montclair Museum of Art in New Jersey, the De Cordova Museum in Lincoln, Massachusetts, the Contemporary Museum in Baltimore, Ronald Feldman Gallery in New York, and Yosemite Gallery in New York. He has received grants from Creative Capital and the New York Foundation of the Arts. Mark is the author of 2 books, the Port Huron Project, Reenactments of New Left Protest Speeches, and New Media Art, and numerous articles. In 1996, he founded Rhizome, an organization that supports the creation, presentation, preservation, and critique of emerging artistic practices that engage technology. Before becoming the chair of the MFA Fine Arts program here at SVA, in 2013, he taught at Brown University, Columbia University, and Williams College. Mark received a BA from Brown University and an MFA from UC San Diego. Please join me in welcoming Mark Tribe.
Thanks, Aya. Good evening. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Aya. So I'm going to do something a little bit different from my usual artist talk tonight, and it's certainly different from what I did a couple years ago when I spoke here last. I'm going to, instead of giving a kind of chronological overview of a lot of different kinds of stuff, I'm going to focus on landscape as a theme and do a kind of archaeological look at my work, because I've done, so much different kind of stuff, but I'm going to basically look at the stuff I've made over the years that relates to landscape. Beginning with a project that I made towards the very end of my time at UC San Diego, where I was getting my MFA, called Car Park. And it featured prominently in my own MFA thesis. I know that you guys are working on your own, or some of you are working on your own theses right now. So I was, we had open studios, and I had a studio visit with the director of the gallery at Southwestern College in Chula Vista, which is a suburb of San Diego on the border of Tijuana. And a few weeks later, he called me up, this was before email, and asked me if I might be interested in doing a project for Insight 94. Insight was a biennial of site-specific art projects that took place at various sites in both San Diego and Tijuana. So his campus, which was basically a 2-year junior college, was one of the sites. And I said, hell yes, of course I do. And at the time, most of my work was collaborative, and I invited 2 of my peers, Nina Kachadorian and Stephen Matheson, to work with me. So we started making site visits, and over several weeks, we brainstormed about lots of different possibilities, lots of different ideas for what to do. And one thing we noticed was that unlike where we had each gone to college, and unlike UC San Diego, these were sort of residential campuses where a lot of people lived. Everyone who went to Southwestern College commuted. Everyone who worked there, everyone who studied there. The campus was built in the mid-'70s, all at once. And you can see, this is an aerial photograph of the campus. The white roofed buildings, the kind of white rectangles in the center, are the buildings of the campus. And it's surrounded by this ring of parking lots, sort of like a donut. where the parking lots serve in a way as a moat, this interface between the suburban landscape that surrounds it, planned housing developments, strip malls, and shopping malls, all built really since the 1950s. And this campus with lawns and trees and low slung flat roof buildings. The experience of parking, of jockeying for parking spaces, competing for the space that's closest to where you want to be, really mediated everyone's experience of this institution. And we tried to think of ways that we might draw attention to that and transform that into an opportunity for aesthetic experience. And I'll just show this video that pretty well explains what we did.
I got you.
If you drove by Southwestern College in Chula Vista today, you might have thought you were seeing things. You were. Cars parked according to color in the lots there today, more than 3,000 cars. The project was a work of art sponsored by the college's art gallery and organized by 3 local artists. Drivers were directed to the correct lot by color coordinators as they arrived this morning. The artists did their homework ahead of time, counting cars and tallying colors to figure out how much room to make for each color.
Hi, can I help you? Okay, you're gonna go to the beige parking lot. It's right up here. The beige? Yeah, you're gonna go to beige. And it's the D parking lot. It's like 3 parking lots left. It'll be on the right-hand side.
We've actually taken a place that people don't think about spending time, which is a parking lot. Somewhere very boring, somewhere you try to avoid, and turned it into a place which might be somewhere to go and actually take a look at what's there. Separating out the colors involves a lot of cooperation on the part of people, and there we kind of get into things like, you know, it's sort of a social experiment.
Beige is a color that has many variations. People have been wonderfully cooperative. Occasionally a red car has popped in and we've been told, don't resist people too much, persuade them, and if they insist parking a red car in a beige lot, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I got a clamp over here.
Stand out like a sore, like a boil on a finger.
It's interesting. I'm awaiting the outcome to see what it's going to be.
Why are you in this lot?
Because they don't have any purple, and the closest thing they can come up with is electric blue.
Are you offended?
Not at all.
You like being electric blue?
No, I like being purple.
Hi. Hi. What do you think about this?
I think it looks pretty good.
Hi, what do you think about this?
It's really nice.
Hi, what do you guys think about this?
It's bullshit.
Why?
Gotta get the car. Gotta get the car. Right, so at the time, well, when I arrived in grad school, I was mostly making paintings and single-channel videos. And over the almost 4 years that I was there, my work changed a lot. And I have to admit, I was influenced very much by my peers. And we collectively, many of us, not all of us, were influenced by Alan Capro in particular, who was one of the, shining lights of the faculty in that department. He's known for his happenings and for writing about happenings. And I thought of these projects as a kind of latter-day happening practice, I suppose. They took place in public. They were participatory. I also thought of them as situation-specific, responding actually not so much to a site, which is really a place, but a situation. In this case, it was the situation of arriving on campus and parking. I suppose since this was the mid-90s, in retrospect, you could think of it in terms of relational aesthetics or relational art. But for the purposes of this lecture, I think we could also consider it as a landscape practice. In particular, thinking about landscape as not just countryside, but also urban and suburban spaces. But that landscape is not the land itself, but rather a way of looking at the land. It's a way of seeing and a mode of representation that has a long history in Western art and in other art traditions. And there are kind of two most important perspectives. One, as you saw in the video, was the perspective from being on the ground and sort of walking through, for example, a sea of red. But the other was from the air, which I think was in the back of everyone's mind. You see it on the video. Of course, if you were on campus that day, you didn't have that aerial perspective. But again and again, people would say, "Oh, are you going to photograph this from the air?" And indeed, there were news helicopters hovering overhead. And the president of the college had a small plane. He was a civil aviation enthusiast, and he was flying photojournalists over the campus the whole day long. So there was a sort of idea in the back of everyone's mind that that we were being part of this experiment that could be seen. We were sort of painting on the land, if you will. And that idea of the aerial perspective being in the back of our minds all the time is going to circle back at the end of my presentation. Right, so shortly after finishing up in San Diego, I moved to Berlin, Germany. And at the time, I was really interested in new media, particularly the web and the internet, which the web was just emerging as a popular medium. And wherever you went on the web at the time, you would see these yellow under construction signs. They took various forms. And wherever I went in Berlin, I would see a construction site. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. So I was there in 1995, 96, and I would ride around the city on my bike on my way to my day job, building websites. And there was, there were holes in the ground and scaffolding everywhere you turned. This whole city was being reconstructed. And I started to see this kind of parallel between the physical urban space of Berlin being under construction and this emerging virtual public space of the internet also being under construction. And I was invited to do an online art project for what I think was the first online gallery for net-based art. We didn't really have the term net art yet. It was called Computer-Aided Curating. It was started by an artist, Eva Grubinger, who was Austrian. And this is what I made. I think this was my first work of net art per se. It wasn't my first website, but it was the first time I tried to use the web as a medium and make an art project that was meant to be experienced online. So what I did was I took a map of the city. This was before Google Maps and all that. I went to a map store and bought a map and scanned it, which at the time was also kind of hard to do. And then one of the first features built into HTML was the image map, the idea that you could put an image on the web, and then depending where on the image you clicked, it would take you to a different page. And so I took the image map feature of HTML literally, and what I did is I rode around the city on my bike with an Apple QuickTake, which was the first consumer digital camera. It was this funny gray blob-shaped thing, and took pictures of construction sites and then mapped them. So wherever you clicked on this web page, you would see a different construction site. And these are tiny images, 320 pixels high by 240 pixels wide, or vice versa. Super simple project, but kind of trying to map the cartographic onto the topographic, I suppose. And I liked some of the artifacts, some of the weird things that this little primitive camera did. Like this is rebar, the steel bars that reinforce concrete. It's still up. It's in an exhibition right now that's touring around. It's called Come As You Are, Art of the 1990s. And so if you go to the gallery, it started at the Montclair Museum and went to, I think it's now at the Blanton Museum in Austin. And if you go to the gallery, you see a photograph of this image, printed fairly large, with a URL in the object label. So then you can go see the site. It broke because of the changes to the way browsers work, and I had to fix it a couple years ago. It's just nowadays, Looks so rudimentary, right? But about 100 photographs. Okay, so moving along, fast forwarding, gosh, almost 20 years, to 2012. I had just come off the Port Huron project, in which I staged reenactments of protest speeches. And then I did another kind of multi-year project called Dystopia Files, where I started collecting video of interactions between police and protesters and showing it in different ways in performances and installations. And so I was thinking about protest speech and street protests as a kind of performance, as ways in which we perform our politics in public with our bodies. You can perform politics by voting, of course, or organizing, but I was thinking more about other kinds of performativity, political performativity. And one of my colleagues at Brown said, well, what about other parts of the political map? What about right-wing political performance? And that was the time when the Tea Party was ascendant, and there were all these Tea Party rallies. And I considered those, but I realized they were really taking their playbook from the New Left. A Tea Party protest, if you didn't read the slogans or listen to what they were saying, looked a lot like a climate change, an environmentalist protest. So I started looking further, and I came upon the Militia Movement, which is a grassroots American phenomenon of non-governmental paramilitaries that are generally autonomous and not organized in the sense that there's no national organization of militias. It's a real grassroots political movement. Its roots go way back, of course, in some ways, to the American Revolution and before, when we organized militias to throw off the chains of colonial oppression. There were all kinds of interesting militias throughout the course of the 18th and 19th centuries, but as a contemporary phenomenon, it really began in the wake of federal assaults on Waco, Texas, and Ruby Ridge. So the Branch Davidians, this Christian cult, holed up in Waco, Texas, and were surrounded by the FBI and the ATF. And a similar thing happened in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, with right-wing extremists who didn't want to give up their guns. To make a long story short, this grassroots movement developed around the country, and it's ideologically fairly diverse. They're all way right of center, but some are more white supremacist, neo-fascist, neo-Nazi, conspiracy theorists, racist, anti-Semitic, hate-based groups. But then there are also groups that are more libertarian and think of themselves as not being haters, self-consciously. In any case, I wanted to look into the militia movement and to develop some kind of project around it. And I came across the work of Chelsea Knight through Momenta Art, a gallery where I was working on a show. And Chelsea had done a project where she had also explored right-wing politics. And so she and I started talking, and then we eventually started collaborating. We started reaching out to militia groups around the country, and I finally found a post on a gun forum about a militia training exercise that they were organizing, this group was organizing, and they said, haters and kooks need not apply. And previously when I had contacted these groups, oftentimes I got no response. Sometimes, in fact, 99% of the time I got no response. But I got a response from this group. I thought this sounds promising. I emailed them, they responded, we went back and forth. We started talking on the phone. Eventually they invited Chelsea and me up to upstate New York to film one of their training exercises. And then we took this film and we worked with a choreographer actually 2 different choreographers, first in St. Louis and then another one in Paris, and developed dance performances in which we kind of translated the firing positions and formations and body language of militia training into the more abstract language of dance. So I'm going to show this video that kind of describes what we did. This is really, as you can see from the title, just a kind of an experiment to show what we did. It was shown, in fact, in a dance theater, as a dance performance, many times as video installations, sometimes as live performances with dancers and video in a gallery. And this is kind of like just to give you a sense of some of the material that's most relevant to my talk here. So what you see on the left are the militia leader, who's a Iraq veteran and one of the members of the group, and he's teaching the younger man how to do a low crawl. And on the right are a group of dancers at the Palais de Tokyo rehearsing. We staged, for the exhibition at the Palais de Tokyo, we staged rehearsals in the gallery with video playing in the background for the run of the show. The idea being that, like militia training, it's this kind of perpetual rehearsal where the performance is always deferred, so we staged rehearsals in the gallery. So you can see in the background on the right is the video that you see on the left. Fast forward here. So we also staged a performance in the woods in a park in Missouri, in St. Louis. And on the right, you see footage of the main training exercise where they used live ammunition and donned their camouflage outfits and prepared for a possible breakdown of law and order. So as I was working on that project, I became increasingly interested in the training grounds themselves and thinking of them as landscapes and thinking about why, like what was the significance of these locations where they trained. Of course, partly it was practical. You'll get in trouble if you shoot a lot of rounds from an AR-15 in your backyard in the suburbs. But there was more to it than that. And part of it was also, I think, that militia training played a role in their lives similar to what hunting might also play in their lives or the lives of other people who live in suburban and rural America. For me, it's probably like the most analogous thing might be skiing or backpacking or rock climbing, or I'm more of a lefty environmentalist type, so I'm not going to shoot guns. I'm more likely to go for a nature walk with my camera. But there was another element of it too, right? Like it seemed like it wasn't purely practical and it wasn't just about enjoying nature. There was a kind of symbolic resonance to these rural places where they trained. I started, while I was there, I couldn't help but take some landscape photographs. And then I returned later that same year to the location where the training had taken place. This is the same place in upstate New York, slightly different perspective on it. And I shot a series of videos there. They're kind of right on the borderline between video and photography, in that there's no camera movement, no editing, no zooming. The camera doesn't move, but the landscape is relatively free of movement, but it's a little hard to see on this projection, but there are lots of subtle movements in the foreground. Occasionally a little fly or something will buzz by the lens. And of course there's the sound of the birds. It's sort of like time-based photography, maybe. Haven't really figured out the right word for it as a medium, but I don't think it's video per se, and it's certainly not photography per se. It's somewhere in between. It felt like the right way to treat this subject, and then it's come back in my current work, which I'll show in a bit, as a format, a way of working that I really like and that I'm exploring further. Part of this practice for me has to do with standing behind the camera and looking with the camera. So it's recording, this location on a certain, early spring morning in 2012, but it's also recording my experience of looking at it. And somehow the time is important. It's not a snapshot. It unfolds over time. And the idea is that projected in a gallery, it might reward a somewhat longer look than, the 3-second, drive-by. Even though nothing's really happening, per se. But on the other hand, lots is happening if you look. So I went back to the militia training videos that I had found online when I was looking for militia groups to contact to film, with an eye to the landscape where these trainings took place. And YouTube, it has a way of recommending things you're not looking for, was recommending a lot of video game play videos alongside the militia training videos. They look a lot alike. In both of them, you have guys with guns and camouflage running around in the woods. And I became fascinated. When I went to the militia leader's house to film this training he was doing in his backyard, where he was showing the guy the low crawl. And when I first arrived, they were all hanging out in his living room playing first-person shooter games. And I was thinking about how video gaming for them might be a kind of rehearsal for the militia training, or maybe also a reenactment of it. Like there's a kind of a blurry line, I think, between the role-playing that they were doing in the woods with real guns and the role-playing that they were doing on screen. And I became fascinated with the artistry and the energy that video game publishers invested in the landscapes for these violent military fantasies. You just look on the right, it's quite beautiful. Why? What is it about the landscape that is so ripe for acting out these fantasies? So I'm not much of a gamer myself, but I really went down the rabbit hole with this. I got a gaming PC and, found the games with the very best landscapes, and found a guy who knew a lot about gaming and could kind of hack some of the games. to make really, really high-resolution screenshots. And I produced a series of landscape photographs by going around in first-person shooter games and taking pictures, and then printing them out and framing them and showing them very much in the way you would show a landscape photograph. In college, I took this class called Liberal Political Thought. It was a political science class. We read John Locke and John Stuart Mill and Rousseau, and in all of these 18th century liberal political philosophers' work, they have this idea of the state of nature. And by the way, here by liberal, we don't mean liberal versus conservative, but it's more like the liberal tradition of emphasizing tolerance and liberty and things like this in politics, the roots of democracy. And the idea is that we enter into civil society from the state of nature through a kind of social contract where we agree to give up the ultimate liberties of the state of nature in exchange for protections. And I thought, maybe this, maybe this is symbolically about the state of nature, about going back to a place where the rules of civil society might be rewritten on different terms, like in the case of these militia guys, more libertarian terms. These are taken from various different games. Sometimes they're the games as they're published, other times they're mods, versions of the games that are made by users. You can download the game authoring software for many platforms and make your own landscapes and your own worlds. This is how they look when they're on the wall. I was thinking also just about ever since I was in grad school and people were starting to think a lot about the internet and virtual reality, there had been this sense that one day there would be this virtual world that we would all inhabit that would be so compelling and so realistic we would get lost in it. We didn't know at the time it would look like this, but I do think we now, like in this decade, we're living through this time when the difference between the real and the virtual is getting increasingly blurry. And it happens when I'm driving my car and I have Google Maps on my phone and the highway in front of me. But it certainly happens for these militia guys and the blurring that takes place between firing a real AR-15 and a virtual AR-15. It takes place for drone pilots who might be living in a suburb outside of Los Angeles, driving to the base every day, flying a drone all day long, surveilling a family, eventually getting the order to pull the trigger, firing a Tomahawk missile, and then getting PTSD because you killed children. For them, the boundary between the virtual and the real, they're playing a video game all day long that actually fires missiles at people in Yemen or the tribal territories of Pakistan. Okay, so moving on. About a year later, I got an email from the chief curator of the Corcoran Gallery in DC asking me if I would be interested in creating a new body of work in response to the Corcoran's amazing collection of 19th century American landscape painting. He had seen, this stuff and, thought it might be interesting for me to look at what they had in their collection and make a new body of work in response to show there. Kind of a commission. So I didn't actually know all that much about the Hudson River School and other 19th century American landscape painters, but I went down and looked at their collection and did a lot of reading, and the question I asked myself was, okay, so this kind of way of representing the land, this kind of landscape, was to the late 19th century as what kind of way of looking at the land is to 2014. You know, what's the contemporary correlative to that? So that way of looking, you know, this is actually a composite. This wasn't an actual view, but he took, you know, a view of probably Mount Whitney and a view of a lake in the Sierras and maybe some, you know, giant redwoods or sequoias from Marin County and sort of composited them all together for this painting that was named Mount Corcoran after the founding patron of the Corcoran Museum. Mount Corcoran, of course, doesn't exist. But I thought, this is interesting. You know, this is in a way the visual manifestation of the ideology of manifest destiny, the idea that this land is ours for the taking, you know, and it's given to us by God. It's this, you know, this divine church, in a way, that that is for us to own, to enjoy, to behold, and eventually to exploit. So what's the way of seeing that is analogous to our relationship to territory today, which is a new kind of empire, you know, the American empire, which we use military might to project our power all over the world as a kind of global police force. And I thought about basically the aerial perspective, satellites and drones and airplanes, and how we use that way of seeing the land to police it and to control it and to project our power. And so I produced this body of work, these aerial views of a virtual world. And these are all pictures of real places in the American West, but they're not optical photographs. This isn't Google Earth. These aren't satellite pictures. But they are screen captures from a simulation. So we're, you know, looking down from several tens of thousands of feet at a model of in this case, Mariposa County in Northern California. And like Bierstadt, I composited multiple images together, all in the same place, but different angles. And that produced these sort of dynamic polygonal shapes. And they're printed on Dibond, which is a kind of aluminum composite material, and then cut out. So they hang on the wall without a frame. The titles are the counties in the western United States where the images were taken. But again, they're all taken from my studio on my computer using this simulation software. I think they're representative of a new kind of image. They're not photographs per se, because they're not records of light. What they are data images. They represent actual places. You know, there is an arroyo. You know, like that in Kane County, Arizona, but it doesn't look quite like that. The software takes the elevations, the topography, and then uses fractal algorithms to kind of imagine what it would look like. Much as the images that drone pilots see theirs involve, traditional videography, where light reflecting off the earth through a lens, but then lots of data as well. The question is, from the titles, it's not clear that these come from a simulation, not actually from games, but from a piece of simulation software. And that's explained in the case of the Corcoran in wall text. In other exhibitions, it's been in like a press release at the gallery desk or, elsewhere. Yeah, I mean, with these and also with the video game landscapes that I showed earlier, often the first question people ask is, oh, where is that? And the answer is it's always, well, it's complicated. Some of these are pretty large. And they get kind of abstract. This is just outside of Sacramento, in a kind of wetland. This is what they look like on the wall. Okay, so current work, what I'm working on now, a series of landscape videos, kind of like the one that I shot at the militia training ground. They're maybe durational photographs or time-based photographs of protected wilderness locations. I'm interested in I'm thinking now about the complicated status of wilderness and nature nowadays. People use the term Anthropocene to describe the age of human impact, a geological era that we're now in when humans are having a determinative and noticeable impact. So if you could imagine an alien life form coming to the Earth 1 billion years from now and digging down through the layers, they could find this layer where some species existed that created all this nuclear radiation and melted the glaciers and caused a mass extinction. And you would see it in the fossil record, you would see it in radiological traces and things like that. So what does wilderness mean today when even if you prevent people from coming to this place, it's still changing as a result of human impact due to acidification of the rain and changes to the climate and the arrival of invasive species and the extinction of native species. So I'm shooting these with a 4K camera, and they're meant to be displayed on a 4K screen. It's about, a pretty big one, about the size of that screen there, but this is a kind of low-res approximation of what you would see in the gallery. And like that other video that I shot in the militia training ground, it's partly thinking about this. I long for an unspoiled wilderness, and I know it no longer exists. And part of me wants to also capture a record of it before it disappears. And the videos are also, I suppose, a kind of record of me as an artist standing there looking at it, experiencing it. With my, my eyes and my ears and all that. So I consider these to be sketches. This is a patch of pine rockland in Miami-Dade County that's endangered. There are plans to build a mall here. And it's also under the flight path of a municipal airport. There's a lot of noise pollution. But 98% of the pine rockland in South Florida is gone now. It's a kind of ecosystem that has tremendous biodiversity. There's 1.8% of it left, and this is one patch of that 1.8% that's, environmentalists are trying to save it, and developers are trying to develop it. And I got a chance to go out there with my camera and capture a few minutes of it. So I consider these sketches for the project that I'm hoping to develop over the next couple years, going to wilderness locations and documenting them for longer durations. What's that? That's wind on the microphone. Working out things like how to protect the microphone from the wind and stuff like that. Well, so these sketches are about 5 minutes long each, and I'm thinking that when I finally work it out, they'll be either feature length or possibly day long. So I may shoot from sunrise to sunset if I can work it out logistically to do that.
Are you imagining these potentially being documents of something for others that they'll never see in the world because they're gone?
Question is, do I imagine these as documents for others whom may see the videos but may never actually get a chance to see the land because it's gone? Yeah, that's entered my mind. Particularly, one of the plein air series, those aerial landscapes on aluminum, was acquired by the Corcoran, which then folded into the National Gallery. So now it's in the collection of the National Gallery, and that means it'll be, even if my studio inventory doesn't get preserved, that'll be preserved. And I was thinking, God, what if one of these videos could, go into a museum collection? It could be, my great-great-grandkids could see it, even though this is, maybe now something completely different. Yeah, so there's a kind of backdoor conservationist twist to this as well. Just one more video. This is the kind of place that I'm most interested in. It's a site in Sumter County, Alabama, where they're trying to restore a prairie that was degraded. So this was I think this was probably a plantation at one point in the probably early 18th to early 19th centuries. But if you go back like 400 or 500 years, it was prairie. There was actually patches of prairie in the Black Belt in the South. And so these environmentalists at UWA, University of West Alabama, are trying to restore it back to prairie by removing invasive species and reintroducing native species. And that to me is really interesting, because that really brings up the question of what's natural. They're sort of making it more natural by intervening in it. It's really on the edge between, it's like using technology to restore a wild ecosystem. And I'll close with this, which is the first drawing I've made in a long time. It's a drawing of that pine rockland that I showed a few minutes ago. And I don't know, my intention is to make a bunch more of these. And I'm tracing off the screen and really slowing down. I mean, the video slows me down too, but this is even slower. And I'm still not quite sure what it means to draw these things, but I've actually been researching eco-disaster films, and I think what I don't think I'm gonna continue drawing the landscapes I'm shooting. Instead, I think I'm going to draw screenshots of landscapes from eco-disaster films, like Silent Spring. Thank you.
Have you thought I'm thinking about your reenactment series that you didn't show tonight, but have you ever thought of going back to landscapes of like political turmoil or anything, and like thought of that as maybe something to look at in a different light?
I have not. It's a good idea. Can you wait for the mic, Gary? I don't think that mic is on. Well, the mic is just for the camera. It doesn't amplify, but it.
The thing that intrigued me the most, that's the reason I'm here tonight, was that drawing. Because when I read the announcement, it said graphite on paper, I thought, given that the through line of your thinking, and I would share this, is that there has to be a seamlessness between the system of delivery and the subject matter. How do you see the through line by going back to this very traditional material? And you did say you didn't even know yet, so do you have any thoughts provisionally about how that works?
Any suggestions?
Believe me, I've been giving it thought for a week, so I will tell you if anything crossed my mind.
So in these durational photographs, have you thought about the fact that in capturing these moments or these experiences, you're also providing sort of a replacement for a sort of a digital version of that experience for people maybe in the future, people who can't get to that location. So I know you talked about the longing for the unspoiled wilderness and capturing it before it fades, but you're also sort of unintentionally digitizing that experience for others so they don't have to go there anymore.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I suppose somebody could say, okay, well, now that somebody's videotaped it, we can bulldoze it. I would like to think that it draws attention to its value. It's obviously not the same thing as being there, especially if you're not a human, but say, a coyote or a panther that lives there. Yeah, I guess I like the idea that, some kind of mediated artifact it's not a replacement for preserving the real thing, but it might be interesting, if the National Gallery, the National Gallery doesn't own this, but if they did, and if they were still around in 2515, and this weren't, that could be interesting to go see it. I think for now, it's different. The experience of seeing this, like in an art venue, would be one, probably a little bit like, but different from looking at a painting or a photograph. Two, raises questions about, and probably might help you think or encourage you to think about climate change and where we are in this process of like hurtling off the cliff into who knows where. And then, you might also wonder about, the future and whether this will be all that's left of it. Who knows?
Actually, what I think is interesting about the landscape videos, if they're an hour long.
Can't hear you, Perry. That doesn't amplify it, just for the recording, so you gotta speak as if it's not there.
Okay. What I think is interesting about these landscape videos is that imagine sitting in a gallery for an hour looking at that with Times Square buzzing around you and time moving so fast in every other way. So it's really a matter of slowing down. To me, it feels more like it's about time. Maybe it is about the landscape, but it's also about an experience of time.
Did you guys hear Perry's question? Yeah, very much about an experience of time and paying attention to something that isn't very eventful. Yeah. And not to share too much information, but I have a little bit of a meditation practice on my own, and I try to, and usually that involves sitting down, closing my eyes, and paying attention to my, breath and bodily sensations and thoughts and things like that. And this is kind of like a standing up, open-eyed meditation. And one of my when I'm thinking about doing these doing this as a day-long video, shooting from before sunrise to after sunset for whatever it is, 13 hours if it's summertime, I think about the challenge for me of paying attention that much for that long, and kind of look forward to it with trepidation. But I do feel like it's important for me to be looking and to be like investing my intention. My intention is to invest my attention while I'm making it, so that there's some integrity to the duration, and I'm not just like pressing record and then like emailing on my phone or something like that.
Your plein air series and the digital studies you're doing now in 4K have a lot to do with an accumulation of a lot of information, and probably more than I can perceive with my own eyesight. But there's so much information there. When you go to the graphite drawing, it's subtractive. You are, you cannot apply as much information on a smaller piece of paper with a piece of graphite. How are these controlled? Are they, is there a specific reduction?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and it maybe is going to help me come up with an answer to Gary's question down the road. So this was the first attempt, and it's the only one I really have to show. But I've been experimenting with ways to get a lot more detail. I have this really big screen, 4K screen in my studio that's 84 inches, and I've been playing around with different kinds of pencils and different kinds of tracing media, and using Photoshop to break up the image into multiple layers of gray and drawing them one at a time. So I don't know where it's going to go, and I have to basically teach myself a method for making these, and I don't know how long it'll eventually take. I could imagine myself getting into a Marilyn Minter time scale of working on a drawing for a year, but this was was sketched off my laptop screen in about, I don't know, 10 hours or so would be my guess. And just relearning how to draw. I haven't drawn in, I don't know, 25 years really. So
drawing is a meditative practice.
Can be, right? Yeah. I was talking to James Sienna just last week, and he was saying how he listens to podcasts, or is it NPR or something like that, while he paints a lot. So in that case, I feel like there's his mind is probably in two places at once. Whereas his hand is in one place, and for me, it's really, I'm trying to just pay attention to what I'm doing in the moment. And given the hectic, distracted pace of my life, I'm really enjoying the break, from that.
There was a few things, but could you speak a little bit more about beauty in the landscape? I mean, you used that, you referenced beauty a few times, and I would like to hear more about your experience of beauty in the landscape.
Yeah, so questions about beauty in the landscape. I want to make beautiful things now, for sure. I'm attracted to it. I think I missed it when I was doing things like Car Park and the Port Huron project that were, maybe fun and interesting, but I want to have a rich aesthetic experience in making the work, and I also want to sort of share that in the work. I feel like it is hard. I think it's hard to tell in here, but I find the experience of looking at these when they're properly displayed to be somewhat like the experience of looking at an Astra B. Duran painting. They really draw me in. They give me deep satisfaction, and my hope is that is a kind of a motivation and a reward for a longer engagement that gives you then an opportunity to also think. So it's working on both an aesthetic level of pleasure and then also maybe a somewhat intellectual or conceptual level.
I just wanted to ask you what it was like when you were working with the militiamen, being a lefty, granola-loving hiker. Was it when you reached out to them, did you present yourself in a different way?
So when I reached out to the militia group, I was really candid with them. I said, my politics are somewhere way left of center. We probably have very little in common. My goal isn't to criticize you or make you look bad. I really am interested not so much in what you say, but what you do and how you train, and I want to show it. I tried not to talk too much about politics with them. Chelsea and I talked a lot about what we would talk about with them and what we would say, and we really didn't want to get into arguments. We got little windows into their thoughts about their motivations, like what are they preparing for, and it is for some unknown but foreseen breakdown of law and order. It's sort of analogous to being a doomsday prepper. They don't quite know what's going to cause it, but there is this idea that society is becoming increasingly precarious, and there is likely to be some kind of rapid decline from this organized, civilized society to one in which people are trying to get them, and they want to be able to protect themselves.
Could have roots in religion in terms of like apocalyptic.
Yeah, there's a millennialist, paranoid thread that appears in lots of different, frameworks and communities. For me, the way I've come to understand what they do, for the guys that were in the army, like serving in Iraq, I feel like participating in militia serves as a bit of a bridge from their experience of military service to being in a very precarious civilian situation where they can take what they learned and they can form bonds of trust with people. They feel like their buddies have their backs, in upstate New York, and the way their buddies had their backs in Ramallah. And then the other side of it is that there's this fear of, rapid economic and social change that people on the right, feel like America's going to hell, right? My big fear is around, things like climate change and the rise of the right. But I'm also, and the way I cope with that fear is by recycling and composting, and they put on camouflage and run around the woods with an automatic weapon. I think there's some questions in the way back. No? Delana, you had your hand up a while back. Is it still?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if, do you limit your impact on the area when you're there recording? Like campers who go out and have, it's like these principles of not leaving any waste or disposing of stuff like that.
Yeah, I try to. It's funny you ask, because one of these shoots I was, this one here, there was this branch. You see that branch there? And I really wanted to run out there and hack it down, but to improve my shot. But I did this National Outdoor Leadership School when I was in college, where you learn about minimum impact wilderness travel, and I try to take with me everything I bring and be careful about what I step on and stuff like that.
So earlier on, when you were talking about the militias, and you were talking about like the how they play video games in their spare time, and that stuck out to me as like having something to do with fantasy. And I was just wondering if you saw like some of this newer work with the conservation of landscapes as and presenting them in like high def 4K images. Like, does that have anything to do with fantasy as well, or? I was thinking about like the idea of right-wing conservatives versus conservation. I guess I'm wondering if this has anything to do with fantasy in the way that the earlier work does.
That's a good question. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. Maybe it's maybe not so much fantasy as desire. It's a kind of, wish fulfillment. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe one or two more. Jeff, you had your hand up.
I have a comment and a question. You might already know this artist, photographer, Hiroshi Sugimoto. His seascape, long exposure photographs is just long exposure of seascape, and then when it's done, it's just one simple shot of, there you go. and it's very heavily based on time. I feel it's very similar to your concept, and what you're trying to record is the beauty of nature passing through time, I think. And yeah, just one connecting the dots here. Question I have, so I was watching the video, I was hoping like an animal would go through, and if they did, what would you do? Like,
Yeah. Good question. So let's see here. There is an alligator in this one. Some of you were in my studio, right? I showed you this. I don't know. We're not going to be able to see it, I don't think, on this screen, but somewhere along here, an alligator swims upstream and stops behind this bush. And I was thinking, what if the alligator swam right up to the camera? It would be way too much like National Geographic, right? I'd have to start over. Yeah, there is, but sort of behind that question, I think, is what about the picturesque and all the landscape cliches and sort of spectacle? Like you start looking at landscapes and there's a lot of cheese, out there, a lot of sunsets and, dramatic lighting. And obviously that's not what I'm after. I'm, consciously and unconsciously, I think, seeking out this kind of middle ground of subtlety and complexity that's not spectacular. Actually, I have another landscape that I shot in this location, but from actually in the opposite direction, that is a little bit more along the lines of what I'm after. This has this somewhat, the composition of this, the way, it's fairly symmetrical with the extreme depth of field, the river kind of, or the strand meandering into the deep background. It's right on the line for me of being kind of acceptable in terms of its quintessentialness or something like that. Okay, Annalisa, one last question.
So I was curious because you took these, when you were looking at the digitized landscapes and you were taking screenshots of them, how much understanding did you have for matte paintings and the painters who made them before they were 3D rendered? Before they became like a character could move through them?
These aren't based on matte paintings.
Oh, I'm talking about the digital pieces that you did the screenshots of and then painted those. Those are done by painters, digital painters that make matte paintings that then are turned into. Not that. That's not what I mean. Earlier, the video game ones.
Well, they make worlds, right? I think the matte painters create the art for the boxes and stuff like that. But
no, they do much more than that. Yeah, I was just curious if you had.
Do you work in gaming?
My husband does.
Okay.
Yeah, and he does paint these trees, everything down to the leaves, before they become 3D and movable.
They chop them up and apply them as textures.
Yeah, like they'll have 10 trees, and then somebody will then 3D model them and then bring them into the game and then plop them down a bunch of different places, everything down to the grass. So I was just thinking, because it is this, like you had shown earlier, the mountain that doesn't exist, this manipulation of this idealized landscape is very much right there already.
What game company does he work for?
He works for Plaid Hat. He works for Hasbro. He works for, he did the board game conversion of BioShock Infinite. So he's done a lot of painting digitally.
Interesting, because we should take this conversation offline.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was just curious. Yeah.
No, I steered clear of the game development companies and the people who work there in making this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's some parallels there that really work to your favor.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd love to know more about it.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Okay.